Welcome to Casa Academy Chapter 4, Part 1, where we will cover authorized relationships, duties, and disclosure. We're jumping right into the foundational dynamic of how you, as a future sales associate, and your broker actually work with the public. As you're going through this material in the Casa Academy pre-license course, you're going to hear the law refer a lot to the broker. But here's a crucial distinction to keep in mind. As a sales associate, you perform all these duties strictly under your employing broker's supervision. You're not directly employed by the buyer or the seller. In fact, the customer is actually your broker's principal. It's a huge mindset shift as we tackle this chapter, but I want to spend a second here because it's a super common stumbling block for new agents. It's so easy to think, hey, I work for the seller, they're paying the commission, right? But legally, your loyalty and your authority route entirely through your broker first. You are literally an extension of their license. So here's our structured roadmap for today. We're going to hit 1. Agency foundations, 2. The 3 agent types, 3. The Disclosure Act, 4. Defining brokerage roles, and 5. Universal duties. Let's get right into it. Section 1. Agency Relationship Foundations. An agency relationship is built completely on trust and confidence. It means the agent is required to aggressively protect specific duties for their principal. A great trick to remember these fiduciary duties for the exam is the acronym COLD: confidentiality, obedience, loyalty, and full disclosure. When you act as a fiduciary, you're authorized to act on behalf of someone else, always putting their best interests first. What does this look like in the real world? Well, loyalty means putting your client's financial interest way above your own potential commission. You definitely don't push a higher-priced home just because it pays you more. You advocate for the home that fits their exact needs. That right there is the essence of a true fiduciary bond.
Moving on to Section 2, the 3 agent types.
Agency law actually outlines 3 distinct levels of authority an agent can hold. Let's break these down with some quick context. First up, you've got a universal agent. They hold the broadest power, usually through a power of attorney. Think of an adult child handling an elderly parent's entire estate. They can make comprehensive medical, financial, and real estate decisions for them. Then there's a general agent. They handle ongoing, continuous responsibilities within a specific area. A property manager is a perfect example here, handling daily operations, signing leases, and scheduling maintenance for a building. And finally, we have a special agent, brought in for very limited, highly specific objective. So where exactly do real estate professionals fit into that hierarchy? Hired to perform a specific task or limited objective? Yep, that's a special agent. For your state exam, it is absolutely essential to drill this into your mind. Real estate brokers are typically categorized as special agents. Your client hires you to help buy or sell a specific property. Once that single transaction is closed and funded, your agency relationship basically ends. You aren't hired to run someone's entire business portfolio, and that's exactly why your authority is strictly limited to the parameters of that one single deal. Section 3, the Brokerage Relationship Disclosure Act. Historically, consumer confusion over who represented who led to some major problems in the industry. And real quick, before we look at a practical scenario that caused this law to be created, your verification code is 897874. Now, imagine this. A buyer submits a $200,000 offer on a property, but then casually whispers to the agent, hey, if they don't accept, I'm perfectly willing to pay up to $225,000. If that buyer doesn't realize the agent actually represents the seller, well, the buyer literally just destroyed their own negotiating position. The agent is legally bound as a fiduciary to go straight to the seller and say the buyer's perfectly willing to pay $25,000 more. Ouch. To prevent costly, real-world disasters exactly like that one, Florida created the Brokerage Relationship Disclosure Act. The whole point of this law is to clearly define brokerage roles and mandate written disclosures in specific situations. Think of it as a playbook to ensure the public always knows exactly who is working for whom. By forcing agents to clarify their role right up front, buyers and sellers can safely share confidential information without that nagging fear that it's going to be used against them at the negotiating table. Section 4, defining key brokerage roles. First up on the roster of representation recognized under Florida law is the transaction broker. This role provides limited representation to a buyer, a seller, or even both parties in the exact same transaction. But here's the major caveat. They do not represent either party in a fiduciary capacity. It's kind of like being a referee rather than a coach. A referee keeps the game fair, makes sure everyone follows the rules, and keeps the whole thing moving forward to the final whistle, right? But they aren't actively playing for either team to win. They're facilitators, helping the deal close without the strict, undivided loyalty of a single agent. On the flip side, we have the single agent. This is a broker who represents either the buyer or the seller as a full fiduciary. We're talking total, uncompromised loyalty to one side of the transaction. And because of that strict loyalty, they can never, under any circumstances, represent both the buyer and the seller in the same transaction. Doing so creates an illegal dual agency. I really want to emphasize that term, illegal dual agency. You simply cannot promise absolute confidentiality and loyalty to two opposing sides of a negotiation. It's an inherent conflict of interest, and Florida law strictly prohibits it. So what happens in the real world if a single agent's buyer suddenly wants to purchase a property listed by that exact same single agent? Well, to avoid stepping into that illegal dual agency, the agent has to step down to a transaction broker role. This requires the consent to transition to transaction broker form. And here's a golden nugget for your exam. This is the only form under the Act that actually requires signatures from the parties, which makes perfect sense, doesn't it? You're formally asking the client to give up their right to your absolute loyalty and confidentiality. Because they're surrendering a pretty massive level of representation, getting their written consent is strictly required. Let's put this into a day-to-day context. Say you're managing a super busy deal, actively working on transaction file number 357148. If the circumstances of that specific deal suddenly require you to transition from a single agency to a transaction brokerage, getting this executed transaction form signed is a mandatory practical step. You absolutely cannot proceed with both parties until that document is signed and placed into the file. It's literally the legal shield that lets you keep working with everyone involved without violating state law. Now let's see how this ties into the legal definition of a customer. It is so vital to distinguish a principal, who has that single agent relationship and gets all those fiduciary duties, from a standard customer. A customer is simply a member of the public interacting with a broker. Under Florida law, a customer may or may not be represented in a real estate transaction. In fact, the law doesn't even require them to have representation at all. You can absolutely assist a customer with buying a home without ever formally representing them, just as long as you follow the basic duties owed to everyone. And that brings us to Section 5, Universal Licensee Duties. Regardless of which authorized relationship you're in, or even if no formal relationship exists at all, there are foundational duties owed by all licensees to every single person they interact with. First, you must always deal honestly and fairly. Second, you have to meticulously account for all funds and documents entrusted to you, which means every single earnest money check is handled exactly by the book. And crucially, you have an absolute requirement to disclose any known material facts that affect the value of residential real property that aren't readily observable to the buyer. Basically, you have to speak up about things like a cracked foundation hidden under a rug or a snaky roof leak that the buyer wouldn't easily spot during a quick walkthrough. This perfectly sets up one of the most vital everyday rules in real estate: the duty to present all offers. You must present every single offer to your client, including verbal ones, no matter how ridiculous you might think they are. Look, sometimes an agent might be tempted to withhold a severe lowball offer. Maybe they want to protect their seller's feelings, or frankly, maybe they just want to protect their own commission from taking a hit. But deciding not to present an offer because you think it's too low, that is a strict breach of trust. It's not your property and it's not your decision. Withholding an offer strips the seller of their right to negotiate, and it can lead to severe disciplinary action against your license. Knowing exactly who the broker represents is essential for passing your state exam. But as we wrap up, I really want you to ask yourself, how will mastering these distinct legal boundaries not just get you a license, but ultimately become the foundation of your entire ethical career and protect the public you serve? Remember, you're not just memorizing rules here. You're learning how to be a truly trusted professional.